The New Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Case of the Sultan's Gift. By Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin. Narrated by Peter Silverleaf. Fate seems to have fun playing games with me. Just a few days after we made a trip to northwest Wales, since I was not going to be fobbed off by Holmes with a simple trip to the zoo, we still made it there. George Collingwood, the third son of Baron Collingwood, whose family had been freed some time ago from an alleged curse including vampire attacks, called us to his workplace to solve a difficult case. Even though Mr. Collingwood's usual domain lied within the reptile house of the zoological garden, the director who knew of Mr. Collingwood's acquaintance with Holmes referred the matter to him. When we arrived at the northern end of Regent's Park, on the border between Westminster and Camden, Mr. Collingwood was already waiting for us at the main entrance of the zoo. After welcoming us and thanking us for our appearance, he came to the point without further ado. "Gentlemen," he said, "the situation is serious. There was a fatality inside the zoo, and it is undoubtedly murder. The victim, it seems, was stabbed in the back." "Wouldn't you have called the police for that?" I replied, a little surprised. Collingwood hesitated briefly, then said, "Well, we did. To be honest, there was some ambiguity about competence." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "How?" he asked. Once again Mr. Collingwood had to gather before he replied. "The two men of Scotland Yard who were here came to the decision that they could not investigate for a homicide. On the contrary, they only found property offence. The director and I disagree. If you would follow me now, I'll show you the victim and the crime scene. That should explain a lot." He went ahead, while Holmes and I were still looking at each other with a puzzled expression on our faces. The riddle already sparked Holmes's interest, so we immediately rushed after Mr. Collingwood and caught up with him at the giraffe enclosure. "To dismiss a murder as damage to property," I mused, "seems to me somewhat disrespectful and unserious, almost unworthy of an official of Her Majesty the Queen." "Right, Dr. Watson," Mr. Collingwood replied, "but it's a bit more complicated than it looks. I think you have to see for yourself." We continued our path past the South American llamas, a bored brown bear, and hyperactive lemurs from Africa. Finally, we reached the area of the zoo which was temporarily closed to the public, probably due to the death. When we passed the cage of a mighty Australian kangaroo, Mr. Collingwood stopped. "Here it is," he explained, "to the left of the great giant kangaroo." Holmes and I walked a few more steps to the bars of the adjoining cage. There, on the floor, laid a lifeless body with a knife in the back. The body was unclothed, but covered with orange-red hair. Apparently our unfortunate murder victim was an orangutan. While I was still pondering whether this might be a silly joke, Mr. Collingwood began his long-overdue statement by saying, "His name is Musa, our Borneo orangutan, Pongo pygmaeus." "That's a monkey," I said soberly, and Holmes nodded approvingly. "Congrats, my dear Watson, your zoological education is making progress." Mr. Collingwood, though, stayed focused and continued. "Musa has only been with us for 3 weeks. He came to England with the HMS Ulysses, accompanied by a Malaysian nurse overseeing the acclimatization, who just left for Borneo 2 days ago. And now Musa is dead, thousands of miles away from home, maliciously assassinated." "That's a monkey," I repeated, giving Holmes a serious look. But he kept a straight face. Musa, he muttered. This is the Arabic form of Moses. There is no doubt that someone here has violated the fifth commandment. That's a monkey, I said for the third time, slower than before. And that may explain why Scotland Yard has refrained from carrying out a murder investigation. The commandments of God, as well as the British Criminal Code, are intended only for human beings. Holmes thought briefly, but had actually already made up his mind. We will make an exception for this great ape, he said, because I firmly believe that the perpetrator belongs to the species of the Homo sapiens. Mr. Collingwood sighed in relief, which completely drowned my sigh. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, he shouted. Thank you for taking over the case. You must know that this is a politically delicate matter. Musa's death could easily lead to a foreign policy or even international crisis, or at least a serious diplomatic upset. I had to laugh. The monkey does not have diplomatic status, right? I asked mockingly. But Mr. Collingwood remained serious. Musa was an ambassador of goodwill and friendship between peoples, he said. He was a gift from the Sultan of Brunei to Queen Victoria, who in turn transferred him to the care of the Royal Zoological Society. You don't give away creatures, I urged him with my index finger raised. Well, Mr. Collingwood replied, this is a diplomatic custom. In this alley just to the left of the orangutan, we have placed the various international gifts side by side. Here are the snow leopards from the Russian Tsar, the hanging belly pigs from the King of Siam, the penguins from the Danish king, the dwarf rhinoceros from the Maharaja of Dungapur, and right next door, the marmots from the King of Bavaria. Rid of my usual repartee, I could only say, Impressive. Holmes took a quick look at the enclosure of the marmots, who apparently didn't seem to do too much during the day. Then he turned to the right, where next door to our crime scene, the kangaroo from the Queensland Territory, which Her Majesty had probably given herself, was undeterred in eating. Highly interesting, he finally said, with a little sarcasm appearing to play along. So, the orangutan was a gift from the Sultan of Brunei. What exactly did the Sultan expect from this donation to the British Crown? There is no doubt that bilateral relations are improving, Mr. Collingwood said. Since Holmes had little interest in international politics, I had to go a little further. You must know, Holmes, I began, that Borneo, by the way, the third largest island in the world, is divided. The southern area belongs as a colony to the Dutch East India Company. In the northern part, the Devonshire-born Brooke family has settled in, with the Sultan's toleration and, of course, a connection to the empire. This northern part, in turn, encloses the Brunei enclave, the Sultan's real sphere of power, which has so far been able to evade the control of the colonial powers. Abdul Momin, the current ruler, is striving to maintain this independent status, which is why he is seeking a balance with the European powers, Great Britain and the Netherlands, Spain and Germany, who are operating in the region. I understand, Holmes said, and the violent demise of Musa is now likely to become a strain on the tender relations between Britain and Brunei? You suspect a politically motivated assassination? Asked Mr. Collingwood. Holmes nodded. Absolutely, he said. There are few other reasons to kill a monkey at London Zoo. I must confess that I could not think of a single reason, only maybe mental derangement. All right, Holmes, I said, noticeably stressed. Apparently this is our time to fulfill our patriotic duty to the Queen and the motherland. We should uncover this devious sabotage of British world politics. Holmes shook his head. But no, my good Watson, he replied. Such conspiratorial backgrounds will subsequently arise on their own or may be investigated by the secret services. This is no longer relevant for the murder case itself and the conviction of the perpetrator. The crime is always explained by itself and its direct circumstances. This raised my suspicions. So what are you proposing? I asked. Quite simply, Holmes replied. While Mr. Collingwood is bringing in the orangutan keepers for questioning, you, will perform an autopsy on the body, he said. And that was when I had to say, "This is a monkey," for the fourth time today. Holmes smiled contentedly. Excellent, Watson. We can build on that basic knowledge. I am a physician, not a veterinarian, I protested. My dear Watson, Holmes replied calmly, don't hide your light under the bushel like that. We will certainly not need a veterinary expert. These great apes are the closest relatives to mankind, if Darwin is right, and he certainly is. Except for a few details, anatomy and physiology are almost the same in the broader sense. We are all hominids. I took a deep breath, trying to accept the inevitable. All right, Holmes, if this is the way it has to be, I said. I would probably never hear the end of this. Mr. Collingwood gave us access to the victim's cage. This, as well as the kangaroo enclosure on the right and the accommodation of the other animal gifts on the left, were structurally related. Behind the back wall of the cages was a staff building. Each of them had a door that led into the cages. However, individual cages, including those of the orangutan and the kangaroo, also had cross-connections in the form of barred gates, in case two of them were to be combined into a larger enclosure. After Mr. Collingwood showed us everything we needed, he set out to look for the monkey keepers as required. Just 2 minutes later, I knelt over the orangutan's body and demonstratively placed my doctor's bag. While I was still thinking how I should start, Holmes impatiently looked over my shoulder. Well, Watson, he urged me, what's the verdict? Without looking up, I replied, the victim was stabbed. Then I grabbed the knife by the handle and pulled it out. With a hunting knife of considerable length, I added. By pushing deep into the upper left back area, it may have pierced the heart from behind. Cardiac arrest leading to immediate blood loss to the vital organs. The victim died while being unconscious before miserably bleeding to death. If you ask me, a highly professional killing. No carnage, no death struggle. The whole thing happened very quickly. Holmes nodded. That's what I thought, he said contentedly. Of course, I replied somewhat angrily. What is the sense in me digging around inside the bloody cadaver of a monkey when you already know everything? With these words I presented Holmes the knife, which I had put in a handkerchief. A Bowie knife, Holmes said immediately. Excellent quality, a stainless steel blade, made in the Rhine-Prussian town of Solingen by the company Blaubart and Sohn. I was impressed once again. That's phenomenal, Holmes, I shouted. How do you know that? Holmes used a handkerchief to clean the knife from the monkey's blood and held it in front of my nose. It is engraved on the blade, see? Now I could see the little lettering as well. Blaubart and Sohn, Solingen. All right, back to the victim, Holmes ordered abruptly. What else can you tell me about our Moses? I breathed deeply and loudly. Then I laboriously turned the body on his back, with Holmes not making any attempt to help me. The face of the orangutan radiated peace and carelessness, as if he was merely sleeping. His facial features almost looked like the ones of a human toddler. I estimate the weight of the victim is about 80 pounds, I explained. The size is about 4 feet. Undoubtedly, this is a fully grown specimen. As you know, I am not a zoologist and certainly not a primate researcher, but I think the minimum age is 10 years. Besides, our Moses is... No, impossible. I had to pause abruptly and looked at Holmes, stunned. What's going on? He asked. Our Moses, I stuttered, is a female. Interesting, Holmes said dryly. Are you certain, Watson? After all, as you pointed out, you are not a veterinarian. I stood up. My dear Holmes, I explained decisively, whether monkey or human, and no matter how much reddish-brown fur covers the pubic area, I recognize a female genital when I see it. And furthermore, I will not overlook when male genitalia are missing. All right, Watson, Holmes said. We should keep this strange discovery to ourselves for the time being. Meanwhile, Mr. Collingwood returned with the 2 zookeepers that were responsible for caring for the orangutan. They were 2 young men in their 20s who had been deliberately contracted because of their experience with monkeys. This happened at the same time as Musa arrived here in London, Mr. Collingwood said. We were looking for 2 caretakers with practical experience. In the last 3 weeks, they have also been specifically trained by their Malaysian colleague and made familiar with the orangutan. I understand, Holmes said. We will conduct the interview together. Then he turned to the first animal keeper, Mr. Goodall. Let us start with you. Mr. Goodall was an above-average tall man with strawberry blonde hair. His work overall was covered in dirt, probably caused by the regular cleaning of the animal enclosures. If I'm properly informed, Holmes continued, then, Mr. Goodall, you found the dead orangutan this morning. Indeed, Mr. Goodall confirmed. I was in the staff wing, to be precise, in the changing room. Suddenly I heard Musa screaming loudly, which was very unusual. I immediately rushed through the back door into the cage, but it was too late. The monkey was already dead. Did anyone see you? Asked Holmes. Mr. Goodall shook his head. I don't think so, he replied. I was alone in the changing room. Even at the cage, there were no visitors present yet. After about 2 minutes, my colleague, Mr. Fossey, joined. Mr. Fossey was the second monkey keeper, an extremely muscular man, but much smaller than Goodall. His work clothes were clean. In the area of his left eye socket, a hematoma was forming, a bruising that would turn into a beautiful black eye by the next day. Mr. Fossey, Holmes asked, where were you at the time of the alleged crime? I had just arrived, he said. From a distance I heard the noise from the orangutan enclosure. I walked through the staff area into the cage and found Mr. Goodall with the dead monkey. I suspect no one met you on your way? Holmes said. Mr. Fossey acknowledged this with an approving nod. Mr. Fossey, I interjected, may I ask what happened with your eye? Of course, he replied, smiling. I got into a little argument in a pub last night. An Irish separatist insulted our Queen. As an upright unionist, I could not tolerate this. You should see my other bruise. Holmes interrupted again. I acknowledge your patriotic efforts, he said, but let's come back to our case. What can you tell us about the victim? There's not much to say, Mr. Fossey began. Musa was a good-natured, trusting orangutan. He must have been living in captivity for a long time and was used to people. I understand, Holmes said, beginning to take a few steps up and down. Mr. Collingwood told us that you were an expert in monkey care. Where did you work beforehand? In Vienna, Mr. Fossey replied. I was responsible for taking care of the mountain gorillas in the Imperial Zoo of Schönbrunn. Work certificate and letters of recommendation are available in the Directorate. That's true, Mr. Collingwood said immediately. Holmes then came to stand in front of Mr. Goodall. And you? What are your experiences with great apes? I've been caring for chimpanzees for the last 5 years, Mr. Goodall said, in the Royal Menagerie of Brussels. My papers have also been duly submitted. Mr. Collingwood immediately confirmed this claim as correct. Holmes walked up and down like a tiger in a cage, twice circling the dead orangutan, before suddenly standing still and proclaiming, "Lords, thank you for your esteemed cooperation. I can tell you that I have solved the case." Mr. Collingwood made an incredulous face. "Solved? Now? How is this possible? Who is the perpetrator?" "Easy, easy," Holmes said. "One after another. First, Mr. Collingwood, I regret to inform you that your monkey keepers are both scammers, independent of each other, but both still." "That's outrageous!" shouted Mr. Goodall indignantly. "Please calm down," Holmes replied. "You still have ample opportunity to explain. The same goes for Mr. Fossey, if that's your real name at all." "Of course it is," protested the second caretaker. "I won't let myself be defamed as a liar by a wannabe investigator like you." Holmes remained calm. "Don't worry," he said. "The identity of Mr. Fossey and Mr. Goodall will certainly be carefully reviewed in the coming days. For the time being, you will have to forgive me that I have sincere doubts about your identity. Anyways, that is not the point." "Well, then, what is the point?" said Mr. Collingwood, who now seemed totally confused. "Mr. Holmes, what spectacle are you playing here?" "A pretty shallow comedy," Holmes replied, "but with the tragic outcome for the orangutan. And your supposed colleagues don't exactly excel in their roles as monkey keepers. However, the professional training that those two gentlemen had is not on par with neither acting nor monkey keeping. To be precise, the two lack the most basic zoological insights. And with the invitation, if I may ask Dr. Watson," Holmes gave me the floor. "With pleasure," I confirmed, bowing to the dead monkey. "Gentlemen, if I may draw your attention to the genital area of the victim, you will see that you see nothing. In other words, the monkey is female." Holmes took over again, saying, "Thank you, Dr. Watson, and we should allow ourselves to ask the question, what kind of primate experts would not recognize the correct sex of their protege?" "Well," Fossey stuttered, "I just didn't question the claims." "A frivolous mistake," shouted Holmes, "which blew your cover. And that was not your only negligence. Additionally, your work certificates are forged because there are no mountain gorillas that you could have taken care of at the zoo in Vienna." "Mr. Fossey," shouted Mr. Collingwood, "is that true?" "Mr. Goodall's fake resume is by no means any less incorrect," Holmes continued. "The Zoological Garden in Brussels went bankrupt as early as 1877 and has been closed ever since. The chimpanzees have moved to Antwerp to establish the Royal Society of Animal Science." "Mr. Goodall," sighed Mr. Collingwood, "you too?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Collingwood," Holmes said, "but your colleagues have never worked in a zoo before and have no knowledge of apes, neither practical nor theoretical. The two men were deliberately given false identities to operate as undercover agents at London Zoo. The particular irony here is that the two knew nothing about each other, as they have different clients. So, everyone thought the other was a real keeper." "And who are these clients?" asked Mr. Collingwood. "This brings us back to the global political and diplomatic dimension of monkey murder," Holmes said. "It will be up to our state authorities to gain certainty about this, but I will give it a try. Mr. Goodall, being given an identity linked to Belgium, I believe to be a foreign spy with the General Intelligence and Security Service of the Netherlands. Mr. Fossey, on the other hand, with a fake background from friendly Austrian offices, probably works for the German secret police. And both had the license to kill." Mr. Collingwood's briefly illuminated face darkened again. "But, Mr. Holmes," he noted, "the question is still open who murdered our orangutan in such an inhumane, even bestial way." "That's correct," Holmes said. "There is no doubt that both had received a corresponding order from their headquarters in Berlin and Amsterdam. After the departure of the Malaysian nurse, they should attempt the assassination, and one was faster than the other. But who is our murderer? Both had the opportunity, but only one killed Musa. For heaven's sake, Holmes, I cried, would you finally tell us who the perpetrator is? Holmes chuckled and then began to illustrate how the murder itself went down. Gentlemen, the following has happened. The perpetrator has come to work earlier today to carry out the murder mission without any witnesses. He carried the crime weapon, a long hunting knife from the client's land, hidden on his lower leg. He sneaked over the staff building unobserved into the monkey cage, where the good-natured orangutan had no idea of the impending attack. When she turned her back on his supposed caretaker, he slammed the knife into her back. The victim immediately fell to the ground. What the perpetrator did not know was that today his colleague, who was also fake, had also appeared earlier in order to carry out the order. And he heard the monkey's cry of death. The offender heard his colleague coming. Before the door was unlocked at the back wall, the perpetrator managed to escape at the last moment through the lattice door into the adjacent kangaroo cage, and from there back into the personal area. However, he collided with the grey giant kangaroo, which is known to be an excellent boxer, and it punched him with his fist, or rather with his paw, to the left eye. Didn't it, Mr. Fossey? The addressed suddenly grabbed his bruise on his face, but immediately refocused. I told you, Mr. Fossey explained, that my black eye came from a pub brawl. Your story, Mr. Holmes, may be interesting and exciting, but none of it is true. None of this can be proven. You're mistaken, Holmes replied. If you have a little more patience, I'll explain it to you. Do as you please, Mr. Fossey growled, but be brief. Thank you, Holmes said. Well, the perpetrator, Mr. Fossey, escaped through the kangaroo enclosure and was back in the personnel area. Meanwhile, Mr. Goodall entered the monkey cage through the rear door and found the dead orangutan. This was certainly a somewhat bizarre situation because, after all, he wanted to commit the murder himself. Mr. Fossey, meanwhile, discovered that his clothes were full of monkey blood, so he rushed to the locker room and changed into a new, clean work overall. Then he ran back into the cage through the back, where he found Mr. Goodall with the dead orangutan, and mimed the surprised and horrified keeper, as both were ordered to do. But now, gentlemen, without any further ado, both of them are convicted. But Mr. Fossey wasn't ready to give up, and asked, I still have not seen your proof. None of this can be proven. My proof, Holmes said with a smile, is in your locker in the dressing room. You had no other opportunity to dispose of your bloody clothes. It is the blood of the victim that will prove your perpetration of that offence. You are being held accountable for your crimes, gentlemen, twice for fraud, hostile intelligence, and treason, once for murder, even if the police did only consider it to be serious damage to property. As an agent of foreign powers, it is safe to say that you will be thrown into the dungeons. Half an hour later, we handed Mr. Goodall and Mr. Fossey over to the custody of Scotland Yard. British counterintelligence would certainly have some questions for the two gentlemen. The secret diplomacy towards the Netherlands and Germany would also be in full swing in the coming days, since it was necessary to demand one or the other explanation, which will presumably end in excuses. For example, deplorable misunderstandings and unfortunate misunderstandings and misinterpretations. When enough hands have been washed in the dull water of innocence and the one or other pawn sacrifice has been given, the secret services of the major European powers from London to Istanbul, from Madrid to St. Petersburg, will enter the ring for the next round. At the official level of international politics, the Sultan of Brunei responded with trade sanctions against Germany and the Netherlands, but this only further threw himself into the strong arms of the British Empire, which he sooner or later could not escape. The days of the independent Sultanate were undoubtedly numbered. Even a reposting of an orangutan to London, which was immediately initiated, would not be able to change this. The murder victim's funeral took place a week after the crime at the animal cemetery in Hyde Park. Mr. Collingwood had arranged for a dignified ceremony, and the name Moesha was noted on the tombstone. On the way back to Baker Street, Holmes and I were silent for a long time. Both of us were lost in thought. Eventually, I was the first to break the silence. "What do you think, Holmes?" I asked. "What distinguishes humans from great apes?" Holmes pondered for a few seconds, then said, "That's a difficult question, my dear Watson, and there are certainly different possible answers. If you ask a priest, he will tell you, the soul." "I don't know," I replied. "I will not sin against the second doctrine of the Church, but the eyes of an orangutan do not seem empty and soulless to me." Hinduism and Buddhism would agree with you, although the correct terminology would be karma. But perhaps the crucial point, Holmes continued, is consciousness. Does the monkey know that he has a soul? Does the monkey know about itself? This may be a purely human characteristic. I had to smile. "Does that mean," I asked, only half seriously, "that the monkey who knew that he was a monkey would be a human being? Isn't there more missing? Culture, arts, crafts, philosophy, science?" "Or war, murder, oppression, and exploitation," Holmes added. "Let us leave the monkeys their paradisiacal innocence. Not everyone was removed from the Garden of Eden." "We have left the garden," I replied, "to fill the earth and subdue it, including the animal kingdom." Once again, Holmes needed a pause for reflection. Then he said, "I recently received a few pages of an unpublished manuscript from our mutual friend, Dr. Engels. It is titled, 'The Part Played by Labor in the Transition from Ape to Man.' Engels envisages evolution as a dialectical and materialistic process that, in the case of our animal ancestors, produces a new kind of man, rising from the animal kingdom caused by the interaction of hand and brain." I ruffled my nose. "Mr. Engels should probably stick to his economy," I replied shortly. "If you transfer the thought back to our religious metaphors, however," Holmes said bluntly, "then Adam and Eve were not only the first humans, but also the last monkeys in our ancestral line." "Do me a favor, Holmes," I demanded after taking a deep breath. "Never say that in public, please." "But it's true," Holmes insisted emphatically. "Ultimately, we're just a bit more advanced monkeys, admittedly with an amazing leap in quality, but we are descended from apes." "You may be," I replied, and again went back to being silent.